Hello, and welcome to Praying with Broken Hearts, Spirituality for Difficult Times. I'm Father Joseph, and this is session 11, Praying Our Spiritual Dryness. Many people, when they first sort of get into prayer, they have a rush of excitement. It's very new. They're trying new things, and they are overwhelmed with joy of getting started. But generally, a time comes when it doesn't feel as new or as fresh or as alive as it once did. It kind of feels like a desert. And so people often think, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I not excited to pray? Why am I not feeling this rush anymore? Well, the truth is, everyone goes through that. Every deeply spiritual person has those moments in their lives when prayer is not the most exciting thing, when prayer doesn't even seem nourishing and alive. And I speak this from my own experience, mind you. I have had seasons of spiritual dryness in my life. There are times when I have to simply go sit in my prayer chair, get out my psalter and sing some psalms and read some scripture readings and say some prayers, even when I'm not feeling it. Because I know that it's not about the feeling, but it's about the prayer. It's about being in conversation with God. It's about being present to God, whether or not I feel a rush of emotion, a rush of excitement, or whether I feel spiritually dry. Because that's often what trips people up. They think that prayer is always supposed to feel a certain way. And that's not true. There are times when we simply must pray because that's what one's supposed to do. Some of our more evangelically minded brothers and sisters might say, well, you sit down and you have this order of prayer that you do of morning and evening prayer, and it tells you what psalms to read, tells you what scripture readings to read, tells you what prayers to say, and you just sit down and pray it even if you don't feel it. Well, yeah, because I know that I want to pray. I want to, even if I don't feel that way. And what a gift to have psalms to sing, or say, you don't have to sing them, scripture passages to read and prayers to say. I know that I have words to pray, even when my brain, my heart, my body, maybe you're too tired to pray or just don't want to pray. And so I have that tool. Other people might have, say, the rosary, or they might have a centering prayer tradition that they do. There's all sorts of ways to pray even when you don't feel like it. But partly you just have to keep going. Generally, you just keep on with that same prayer practice until you break through. Because there's sometimes a temptation, well, if I try something new, well, what you're going to get is the novelty of it. You're going to get, well, it's new, it feels new. But sometimes you got to just stick with what you're doing and trust in it, trust in God. Think about your own experiences of spiritual dryness. Reasonably confident you probably have one that you can call to mind. What was it like? What was it like when you weren't able to pray? You didn't feel like it. What did you do? Spiritual dryness is very difficult at times because spirituality is such a nourishing thing. That's why we've been spending so many sessions talking about how to live spirituality in the midst of difficult parts of our lives, to pray with our broken hearts. This one, praying when we feel spiritually dry, is probably the most difficult. Because we just have to keep going. We have to choose to keep praying. That one's hard. It's no wonder that this spiritual dryness is really a desert. And in fact, spirituality calls it desolation. A desolate wasteland, maybe, of our lives in that moment when we just can't pray. or a dark night of the soul, when all of the things that drew us to prayer just don't feel to be there. One of the things to keep in mind is sort of the marriage metaphor of spirituality. Now, I'm not married. I know plenty of people who are married, and I can take it on their witness that sometimes you have to really choose to love your spouse. And that probably applies to anybody in a long-term relationship, anything like that. Sometimes you have to choose to love them, because sometimes they don't make it easy. There are days when you notice their quirks or the things that just drive you up a wall, and you have to choose to love them. Not because they pull that warm, fuzzy feeling out of you, but because you look at that person and say, I want to love this person. And so in the same way, well, a similar way, we sometimes have to do that with God. When that warm, fuzzy feeling isn't there, we have to choose to love God. And in fact, spirituality would say sometimes this is a grace that God gives us to remind us that we are choosing to love. God chooses to love. God chooses to love everything and everyone, all of creation. God chooses every moment to love. And we too have to choose that, because sometimes there's not that warm, fuzzy feeling. So sometimes that spiritual desolation, that spiritual dryness helps us to love other people too. We learn to love them not when they're lovable, but when they're frustrating, when they're human. You might think of other family relationships where you have to actively choose that love, perhaps with a parent or a child, a friend, someone that sometimes it's easier to love them than others. And spiritual dryness is in that similar vein. So keep praying. Keep praying. That's the only advice I can give you with spiritual dryness, is to keep praying. Keep praying the way that you have. Trust in God. Trust that God hears it. God is there in your prayer, even if you don't perceive it. And of course, if you feel compelled, do talk to a spiritual director or a spiritual counselor or advisor about it. Share your experience. If nothing else, so you can know that it's perfectly okay to experience this. Thank you for taking this journey so far. We have one session left, and I promise it'll be a good one.